Give them bread and circus and they will never revolt. But what if circus becomes politics? People may no longer accept two-faced politicians. And out of most is people's innate thirst for chaos setting stage for World War III. Now, we must not make the same mistake our predecessors did in answering these questions. Assessing the present without understanding the past does and will create wars for eons to come. We must understand the history of Ukraine and Russia to answer the cries in the war more efficiently. But let me ask you to join me in a journey, if you may, on understanding the history of Ukraine and Russia to understand the conflict of it, which is we are right now. I've seen countless videos on YouTube explaining the concept, but I thought it's too early to comment on any of this, as the war has ended, or possibly ended by the standards of US. Now let's talk about why this happened and how we could have handled it better. Now, one of the most important parts to understand about this is of Russia and Ukraine's creation. The Russian state began in 1862 and the baptism of Russia happened in 1988. Now, this strengthened Russia's economy as people had shared territory and faith. This also began a lot of conspiracy in the state, and fragmentation of Russia happened, making it vulnerable to external threats. Now, the southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, was drawn towards the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which later unified with Poland. Now, Poland oppression of Ukraine have started. And they started to embed this idea of Ukrainians, which never had existed before. Now, the people were told that they are different from Russia. Now, usually the Ukrainian just meant the people living in the outskirts of Russia, but here it had a different meaning. They were from different race, different ethnicity, and completely different culture, which is something we see in propaganda, of course. Now, now this polarization created drastic changes, and after the Polish people started to create conflicts in Ukraine, the Ukrainian people saw refuge from more Russian and Orthodox origin rulers, and war began to erupt, and which led for unification of Ukraine back to the Russia. Now, before World War I, Austrian journal created the idea of Ukraine to win a propaganda war. In 1922, Brzezinski established Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before. Lenin transferred newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine, some of land which never historically belonged to Ukraine. So this is how Ukraine came to be, and it seems very obvious that if Russia came to power and said, I want Ukraine, they can have it. I don't think so, because now they are a republic country, right? Now, a very famous dialogue in this discussion is of why did NATO expand 1 inch eastward when they promised to? Now, this agreement is actually known as the 2+4 agreement, and it was established by the US Secretary of State, James Park, famously told Soviet leader on February 9, 1999, if Germany remained in NATO, the alliance jurisdiction would not move 1 inch eastward from the current position. Now, this is the most interesting because since then we have expanded, NATO has expanded hugely in eastward. And why the hell this happened? So first thing to understand about this is that it was no legal binding. It was just a word of mouth. It was just a promise, which has never been abided by in unfortunate US foreign policy. Now, US has this tendency to not follow and not value the promises of its predecessors, which is a very big problem in international politics, and most of which is grounds for creation of conflict. Now, there was no legal binding promises in NATO's expansion beyond Germany, but one of the most important parts to understand is that even if it was, it wouldn't be constitutional. It would not abide by international politics. The NATO's expansion was actually very standard. People of Eastern countries wanted to join NATO, and NATO said yes. So it was not like they were actively winning a propaganda war and trying to include these countries. It was just the fact that they wanted to join, they wanted to expand. Hooray. Now, one of the other reasons this never stopped is because the good goddamn money. Now, Eastern European countries joining NATO had to abide by the standards of NATO security standards, which often meant replacing Soviet era military equipments with newer military equipments. And here, basically, it meant primarily USS. This created a huge demand of billions of dollars in US defense industry. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing made over $10 billion per year from these demands. Now, US defense industry gained $1 billion from this, and US foreign direct investment in Central European rose from 5 billion in 2000 to over 30 billion in 2020. Now, US LNG export to Europe, including Eastern Europe / NATO states, grew from near zero in 2016 to 13 billion annually in 2023. So one of the most important part to understand is that there was an ideological war, but there was huge economic war going on, which unfortunately maybe Russia saw, but maybe they just never did anything. Now, a very good question to ask is that why does Russia says they invaded Ukraine other than rise of neo-Nazi, which of course is actually the second argument. The primary argument is revolution of dignity. And the center stage of revolution of dignity is President Yanukovych. Of course, there are two perspectives here, the Ukraine's perspective and Russia's perspective. And we're going to explore both. Now, Ukrainians assert that it's a sovereign and independent state. It's not a little Russia. And Putin's argument is that Ukraine has always been part of Russia. And if it weren't for foreign invaders and propaganda artists, Ukraine would still be in Russia. Now, Ukraine argues that in 2014, the revolution was legit. And Russia says that it was a propaganda orchestrated by United States of America and NATO, manipulating Ukraine in turning into against Russia. Now, the protest primarily, what was the protest about? So, Yanukovych said that in his election, he said that I will make Ukraine part of NATO. And people said, yes, I want this president. Now, Yanukovych already had some Russian tilting. He was already tilting towards a little Russia, but he said we will join European Union and of course NATO. And before and all of this happened, and then he said no, we're not going to join NATO. And why? What was his argument why he cannot join NATO? Yanukovych argued that Ukraine economy is too weak, which seemed very interesting because it was. Ukraine economy was very weak to handle EU's free trade agreement, and he claimed that Ukraine needed financial assistance to establish economy before making major economic shifts. And EU did not offer immediate financial aid, while Russia offered around 15 billion in loan and cheaper gas. Now, the key thing to note here it is that Ukraine was highly dependent on Russia for energy, and if they were to transition to European Union, Russia would crush Ukraine in economy. People will die of starving, and people will definitely froze to death. Now, that seems to be his argument. Now, the center stage of Yanukovych's argument was that Ukraine should not pick a side of either NATO or Russia. They should be neutral, and as they were between two big rocks and rocks were closing. And his argument was we should stay neutral. Well, now Yanukovych actually promised to join NATO if he became president. So it was his rally, and he actually very efficiently killed around 100 people, some of which were sniped down and were met with open gunfire from the revolution ground, and the buildings were burning. A lot of people died, and it was a disaster that was never seen before. And of course, Yanukovych fled to Russia. That probably makes sense. And The lavish lifestyle of Yanukovych was actually his luxury mansion, which was had gold toilets and private zoo. Expensive car was actually and stole, which implied that he stole billions from Ukraine, and it was later turned into a museum. And after that Ukraine shifted towards European Union and NATO, and they sought to join Russia. Now NATO was on the borders of Russia, and this meant that America would definitely have a military base very close to Russia, which was unacceptable, because if Russia were to have its own military base somewhere in Mexico or in
Venezuela,
or somewhere in South America, US would probably declare war in that zone too. Now, after that, Ukraine had a shift. Russia did not formally declare the war, they declared it as a special military operation. Russia launched military operation in February 24, 2022. Some resource provided broad estimate of combined military and civilian loss. In September 2024, the Wall Street Journal reported the total of 1 million killed and wounded, both Russia and Ukrainian. Now, so many kills. What the hell did we achieve? Nothing. No one achieved nothing. Now we come to the infamous meeting of J.D. Vance, President Donald J. Trump, and Zelensky. Now, if you may, let me do a psychological analysis of the goddamn meeting. J.D. Vance showed extreme loyalty to POTUS, as he should, as he's a vice president. There was no hyper-intellectual subcontext in the arguments. It was just a fight, an emotional fight, a fight which was registered on an emotional level, because the authority of the high-achieving individuals were actually challenged by the president, who was unfortunately a foreigner. Now, Zelensky was a president in a war, and his attire showed the same. He was not in a suit, so he was not there for a diplomacy. He was there for a wartime meeting, and his actions, his words, his tone showed that. And when Zelensky actually challenged the diplomacy of US and Russia, J.D. Vance took it as an attack towards POTUS, because he was actually complimenting POTUS. Then he argued that Russia cannot be argued against, and the compliment seemed to be in vain. And maybe J.D. Vance thought that Zelensky actually tried to manipulate the argument and say that, well, diplomacy is nothing and President Donald J. Trump will probably fail, which was, bad for the meeting in many understanding. Now, the most important thing which happened was Zelensky said, you have nice oceans, but you're going to feel in future. What the hell that meant? Now, there are some conspiracy theorists who are saying there is going to happen an extreme geophysical event or geo-extreme event, whatever that means. But it just means that US never gonna understand the pain of losing borders, right? Because US is surrounded by oceans. This is one of the reasons US has never been invaded, other than Europe. Europe's first people, and it's probably not gonna be invaded again in near future. So they have good oceans, which means they are protected from all the sides. And this is what Zelensky meant, instead of saying that they're going to attack America, or Russia is going to attack America. So, in the end, we need to understand very specific things. Because Zelensky was portrayed as a beggar in America and as a war hero in Europe. Because, in fact, Zelensky was a war hero in Europe and he was a beggar in United States of America. That's just the facts. In the end, Zelensky accepted the POTUS's terms and conditions with full cooperation. War ended, but at what cost? Zelensky was very clear that he wanted to establish statue of Rome in Russia and wanted revenge and wanted territory, but that never seemed to have happened. There was no justice served, no major geopolitical agreement. Countless lives lost in veins, countless lives screaming for justice to get ideological justification. In the end, promises were made for collaboration, but promises are just words, just like love and loyalty. Now, US is known to not respect the promises made by its predecessors. Now, when next time Russia wants to expand its borders and territory, till then will America provide security to Ukraine? These are the questions we're never going to know the answer of, because propaganda won this war. Neither Russia nor America did, but propaganda did win. In the end, Russia and America gonna mutilate Ukraine's economy because sweet, rare earth minerals. And people lost their life, and they thought they were fighting for ideology, but instead they were just fighting to keep resources. In the end, everything was stupid. So, see you guys until then.